Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tribal Knowledge Community Podcast, where we explore the systems, souls, and the stories behind great online communities. Today's episode is a special one for me. I'm talking with my mentor, my community mentor, and he's one of the first people who showed me that community isn't just a program, it's an ecosystem. Scott Wilder built Intuit's very first online community, the TurboTax community, long before community management had a name, a tool set, or a playbook. He just built it intuitively. Scott has this rare gift for making community culture tangible, translating it into operations, workflow, and partnerships at scale. He's led at companies like Intuit, Marketo, Google, and HubSpot, helping teams turn engagement into action and conversations into business intelligence. We'll dive into how platforms and processes become extensions of community values and what lessons from these early experiments will still shape how we build today. That's one about heart and infrastructure, culture meeting code. Welcome, Scott. It's really good to have you on here.
Great to see you again. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
And now tell me about the beginning. When did it start at Intuit, and what inspired you and the company to launch the TurboTax community?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I was managing the first e-commerce site, Intuit's first small business e-commerce site. I was managing their digital programs, and anybody that manages a website knows that the rest of the people in the organization say we need content. We want content, more content, and especially today, even with AI. So I basically had a pretty small team, and what I said to them was, "Can you give me the resources to have, writers, people who can blog, or people who can write product descriptions and things like that?" I asked the marketing team, I asked product marketing, and very few people were stepping up, to pay. And I was like, you got to pay to play. But I wasn't such a hard ass where I just said, died on the sword for that. So that's when I talked to Elliot, the person who I worked for, and said, we should try a community. I had worked at AOL beforehand. I'd worked at Borders, and we created lots of different types of communities there. And he said, well, just go do it. Make it a Skunk Works project. So I ran into Scott Cook, who was also the founder of the company, and I told him about it. And he said, just go do it. Make it Skunk Works. So basically got a server connected with a company called Web Crossing, which was one of the early innovators in this space. And just really tested it out. And at first, it was a community for both customers and also accountants as well. And what I didn't expect is it took off like crazy because it was the perfect storm. There are very few communities in the B2B space at the time. The Wall Street Journal actually wrote an article about us being one of the first. And what was interesting is that accountants love helping small businesses for both, they're passionate about small businesses, but also because those are potential clients. Right. So really, you think about, different marketplaces or different, different platform strategies. We had the providers and the people who needed help. Right. Or, sometimes they say buyers and sellers, but it was buyers and sellers of information. And so it took off like crazy. And within a month or two, I went to Scott Cook again and said, I need $1 million to make this all work. I kind of really need to pay more for the platform. Web Crossing was doing a favor for me. I wanted to train and hire our support reps to become moderators. And so the great story is, so then Scott Cook said, well, go come to the executive meeting, present to Steve Bennett, the founder of the company, and, make your business case. So one of the great pieces of advice I got was to partner with legal and privacy at the time, because we're a little more evolved today. But back then, people were worried that if a customer said something negative online, it would bring down the whole company, or an employee wouldn't be trained properly. So I worked out some guidelines, which I still have today. And this was in 2002. And I presented with legal. The CEO loved it, but then he went around to his direct reports, to everybody in the room, and said, will you support this? Will you support this? And there's actually only one person who said they wouldn't. And it was the head of corporate communications, because they had that fear we talked about earlier of bringing down the company, of what somebody would say.
That's right.
And Steve Bennett, who was the CEO at the time, He basically looked at the person and said, "So you hired somebody you don't trust." It was a classic moment, and he looked, and the guy like backpedaled and couldn't find his words, and then all of a sudden, Steve Bennett said, "You got your $1 million," and we really evolved quickly. We started with kind of what we all know as like a community platform of discussion threads and blogs and things like that. But then we actually embedded the community into the TurboTax product. We also embedded into other products, QuickBooks and Quicken. What was interesting then is the web wasn't as evolved, so we really had to figure out how to take a web experience and put it into a desktop product. We didn't have online QuickBooks then or online TurboTax. And some of the real innovations there were, as you moved through your screen, all the community content was contextual, right? So, if you were on a screen about W-2s or 1099s, the discussion threads were contextual. And then the second thing, which I think applies today to AI, is we, in the second rev of it, we basically highlighted information on who was providing the answer, who was providing the information. So, one of the key things for AI discovery, if you're creating content or doing community, is highlighting the expertise of the person who is providing the answer. And so, it just evolved from there. And we moved it into other products, became a big part of the company DNA. I will say another angle on this is Intuit is really strong in terms of customer-driven innovation. More so, you can look at me on LinkedIn and worked at a number of companies. By far, they're the ones that really develop ideas, products with customers. And I think that's really key because since I was schooled at Intuit more than any other company, I was able to really bring our community members early on into like, what's this thing going to look like? I mean, basically it was me at first. So it was, what's this thing going to look like? And what role they want to play. And two examples are, one guy raised his hand who was a customer and said, "I would like to start a Spanish language section." Like, my Spanish at the time was pretty elementary. Then I married somebody who speaks Spanish. So, so we created a Spanish language section. Another example is before ideation really kicked in, somebody said, "Why don't you do this for ideation?" and really helped manage that whole part. And I think, Intuit and other companies, Intuit by far embraces this customer-driven innovation approach. And so, what happened, in kind of summarizing everything. One is there was an internal need, and then there was also this external needs, small businesses, you've had a business. It's for those who are a little bit older, it's like the Maytag repairman, you're kind of on your own. And, small businesses wear many hats. So it's perfect in terms of, getting advice from others, right? So there was definitely a customer need there. The accountants were important. And so that's kind of the whole history of how it took off. And there's a LinkedIn post called the $1 Million Play or something that I wrote, and it goes into a lot more detail.
And so you really answered the Scott Cook's, question that he's always asking, always since even 25 years ago when we were there, is finding that unmet customer need, right? Even though they don't know they need it, and then you provide the solution, and that's what you did perfectly. And in fact, I think you were the first of anyone in the world to put links to the community into the product. I thought that was ingenious. I never forgot that lesson and carried it with me throughout the communities that I set up later. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's so Scott Cook, great call out there is, he's always like, what's the customer need? And we talked about, the small business need of they're on their own, they're trying to learn lots of things. And then, it's funny about the product. Intuit is like really taken the idea and done, better than I could even imagine. But it baffles me that very few companies have really embedded community in the product other than like a link at the top of the page or something like that.
They bury it. You can't find. You can't find it even.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand that. I mean, you built that blueprint for community success 23 years ago, and I don't think it's changed much because the fundamentals are very sound. The technologies have improved amazingly. Like we could never imagine AI would be where it is today. But I'm still kind of, that's what kind of why I'm doing this podcast, educate people. Hey, we have these experts that are available to speak with you. Just invite them for a lunch or virtual chat and listen to what they're saying. They'll tell you how to succeed. So
Yeah, I mean, people like Danny and Bill, I mean, the great thing about these guys is they've been doing it, like me for 20, 30 years, and they're accessible,
that's
right?
right. You step
And I
up,
think, yeah.
just meet them at a conference or give them a shout out on LinkedIn and have a video chat. I mean, they're not going to charge you anything. You guys love what you do, and I think it's just a wealth of information that's not being tapped. So I'm hopeful that this podcast will help that discovery, help that flow. So let's shift gears into tools and operational backbone. Now, you're known for taking ideas and turning them into systems. How do you translate community values, empathy, transparency, and connection into operations that scale? That's the big thing, scale.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a great question. So, I think the big thing is trying to figure out when when you have the idea for a community or you're inheriting a community, is think about that culture that you want. And, HubSpot likes to talk about culture being a product. That's one way to think about it. I look at it as like the culture is the community is like the veins and bones in your body, and the culture is the blood that has to keep circulating through things. It's this living and breathing thing, and it has its ups and downs. Little bit out there in terms of the idea, but that's how I think about it. So when you start out in your project, to really think about those guiding principles that you want as part of your community. That's and it's going to affect your decision making, your processes, how you collaborate, the product itself. And I think a big miss is that companies create these guiding principles, leaving the customer out. It's really funny on LinkedIn. I was thinking about this over the weekend. Everybody's like an AI guru now. Everybody's providing AI insights on LinkedIn. I would say I have not seen one AI post that talks about what the customer thinks. Right.
That's a good point.
Right. And so, at some point I'll write about that. But, and I think when you're trying to establish a community culture, it's what you want to do, what you do from a company perspective, and it involves the platforms, processes, and people. But the people part goes beyond your borders. And it's really about like you mentioned ecosystem earlier, right? Your partners that are involved. I talked about accountants at Intuit. It's your customers, and really working with them to define what you want that to be. At Intuit, you might remember this is some of the brand principles were knowledgeable, approachable, being knowledgeable, being approachable. And that's how we really thought about community as well. And so we basically established I call it like an editorial board. And we had people from different parts of the company on that board. And you'll see why in a second I call it an editorial board, right? So we had somebody from, Ken was at Marketo, but we had somebody from support, somebody from marketing, a community person. We had a number of customers. We had accountants, right? So we had that whole ecosystem, and we brought them in, and we thought about this editorial model. And what I mean by that is myself or the community leader could be the editor of the site. To think about a publishing model. And then you have different areas where some person is like it's like having the business editor or the arts and leisure editor, but here they're responsible for ideation, or they're responsible for product release information, or they're responsible for, if it's Intuit, QuickBooks discussions or payroll discussions, right? And you're bringing that all together, and the layer that cuts across it is the cultural stuff I talked about, but it's also having these guidelines, guardrails, common graphics, things like I'll come up with all the G's for that. So that's how I really approach it, is really figuring out up front, what are those guiding principles? And, you said this earlier, something I left out just now is, what's the pain point? What's the job to be done that, your audience wants to accomplish? And you really need to be transparent about everything. And, it sounds obvious, but transparency, it really involves communication. We did Intuit. We didn't have Slack. We didn't have Teams and things like that. So you have to overly communicate. When I was at Marketo, it was really funny. The way Marketo was set up is the marketing team sat on the fourth floor, the product team sat on the third floor of the building, support sat on the second floor. Even though we have email, even though we have Slack, because we were in the same building, but we were still separated, right? There were so few people in marketing who actually talked to support. And so I would have my team actually every day sit with a different group. There's something, so part of the culture is inclusion, but I think sometimes physically you have to like move your BFA, your big fat something. My parents always used to say, Scott, move your BFA. And so, all these are different like aspects of like, how do you build a culture? And then like a product, especially like an interactive product, you have to refine it over time, build that feedback loop, figure out like how you can improve it. At LastPass, where I am now, we're building a whole cross-functional group around AI discovery, right? And everybody's in the beginning of the journey of this. So that's where feedback is really important. That's how sharing, knowledge is important. That's how collaboration. And the last thing, and then I'll shut up, is building culture cross-functionally requires shared metrics, shared goals. I was at a company, a very well-known company, that slapped my hand when I brought up shared metrics and shared goals. And I was really baffled by that, because even today, where we're, everything's kind of merging. You have, anyway, very key part of the culture.
And everything that you described from, getting that editorial board, this blueprint, you created this at Intuit. I mean, this is from the very beginning. You've had these, intuitively, you knew how to use that. That was in your DNA, and that's something that I've embedded into my DNA. So every company that I run, I have the good fortune of being a journalist and an editor. So that editorial board really resonated with me at the beginning. So I started, that was one of the first things that I didn't have. I didn't make the style book too strict, because the corporate folks like to have that brand guide. But if it was official stuff, we'd have that. But if it was just a blog, I'd say just go with it, go with your own voice. So that's amazing.
It's funny. Steve Jobs, when he gave his famous Stanford commencement speech, he talks about how sometimes you're doing something, and he took a calligraphy course at Reed College, and he called it a drop-in because he dropped out, but he sat on this calligraphy course. And then 15 or whatever, 10 years later, the fonts on Apple was so important. And so he said, sometimes as you move forward or age, you have to connect the dots from the past. And the reason I thought about the editorial approach when I was at Intuit is because I ran a school newspaper in college, right? And that's where I learned how to set up, this structure, this cross-functional structure. And, nobody wants, I don't want to be like the editorial, the guy at the top of the pyramid or hierarchy, but you need somebody to make the final decision. But if you set up those guidelines and guardrails, you can let people I'm going to mix metaphors, run free like a sailboat a little bit, and, be able to really excel in creating, the support person creating support content, or, the ideation product person, really like foster that community for people to create ideas.
Absolutely. And that I know at the newspapers I was a reporter for, the editor was like the night editor, especially, was someone you didn't want to make a style mistake or a misspelling, because you'd get your butt chewed out for sure. But I'm glad that you weren't too strict with your ad hoc kind of journal, corporate journals there.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
Speaking of some of the resistance you've had in the past at different organizations, what's your approach to building trust with the teams or the executives who may not get community at first? They're just like that sharing of the of the analytics, for example.
Yeah. Usually, I think this is where you need to like think about like, how do you test something? How do you The people who have doubt, hopefully they can't say no to like experimentation. So create a small experiment and start there. I will say the person of the shared metrics, he just never really bought into that. But I think you start small, and you need both grassroots support as well as, find somebody at the senior level who is going to embrace it. Having customer verbatim is really key. Like, so having, show what customers are saying and showing how you can have an impact on the customer's success, right? So, and today it's a lot easier to take all the listening channels, all the listening places that you can learn and bring them all together. So, at Intuit, there was, resistance by that one corporate communications person. So what I said to him was, pick somebody on your staff and let me work with him and take one small part of community, and let's share, content from corporate communications, and let's ask for customer feedback. Right. I think
That was
that's one big.
That was my
What?
boss. By the way. That was my boss that you had trouble with at corporate communications.
Yeah. We can talk lots about that, but then we'd have to edit
Yeah.
this. But it's funny. I think the biggest challenge with community obviously is the budget part. I think people, 80% of the time will embrace it, but it just comes down to budget. And so that's where you really need to figure out, how are you going to test things? How are you going to start simple? Today, there's all these different community platforms out there. And maybe you have to sacrifice, maybe you get 70% of what you want, but you're, for a lower cost platform. And, I'm not saying you're going to change platforms all the time, but kind of thinking that way as well. It's really hard to prove the ROI on it. So then it's funny, a lot of the ROI that's done, and you'll appreciate this, is like, okay, I'm going to do case deflection and it's going to cost, $100 a contact. But very few, I also, when I build those models, do like a mixed attribution model of saying, okay, it's, if we're projecting the way, like, these companies define case deflection, I'll cut those numbers in almost half, right? Like, so they'll say, you start filling out a case and then somebody does not, complete the case, that's a case deflection. So I'll take that number, say it's 100, and I'll just make it 50, but I will share that with the person who is evaluating the ROI with me. I'll share that with finance and corporate. So a quick answer to your question is, start with experiments, small experiments. Make sure you're clear about what you want to accomplish. Build out kind of a mixed attribution model. So those are just kind of two simple ways.
So is that kind of the secret for getting executive buy-in for community investment in infrastructure? Is that just start small and proving yourself?
I think so. There's you will have some executives who will say, God bless you, go for it. Here's $100,000. But I think you have to plan for the other group. The ones, if they have, $100,000, they. I think also another key thing is think about where the center of gravity is going to be for community. When we were at Intuit, I got lucky that we moved community every 6 months to a different group. Like, it was in product, it was in marketing, it was in support. That doesn't happen. That's the only time it's ever happened to me that company's been open-minded. So think about, who's going to be your daddy or your mommy, who's going to be paying for it, so, Gainsight's had a lot of success in the customer success space and so figure out what's important to the customer success people. Better mode is probably targeting marketers more. So figure out what's important to the marketers. LastPass, it's a combination of CX and product. So figuring out, if it's product, right? So, product's always wrestling with that time to value, that friction. So that's a great opportunity to get, community into the product or self-serve into the product to help them.
And then we were talking about community insights that go back since beginning of community to the present day. These are like the golden nuggets that how do you make sure, or how does your team make sure that they actually influence product and customer decisions? How do you get that? How do you make your point, like with product team or development team?
Well, So obviously having ideation is part of it, but I think something that was really effective at Marketo is Liz, who was great with this. She basically was able to establish a weekly lunch with the product team, and they actually went through that. She would basically look at all the product suggestions. So that's one bucket, and then she'd look at the status. But she would, in that lunch, and food is really good at bribing people, by the way.
Yes.
And then she would go through each item with the product team, right? So all of a sudden, Liz was very popular, and so she got people in the room, but then people felt a sense of ownership. They were on this call or they were in person, going through each of these items. I think part of it too is, LastPass has a few products, Intuit has many products. So at Intuit, again, taking this editorial model, and maybe it's like you're breaking it down a little bit, right? So like, if you read the New York Times, the Arts and Leisure section editor, they might be like the movie editor. So I'm breaking it down further where, you might have the QuickBooks editor for community, or QuickBooks ideation or Quicken ideation, right? And giving them ownership of it. So obviously having the ideation functionality. 2 is the ownership. 3 is like, some sort of bribery or gamification. So we also gamified it with the product team as well at Marketo and HubSpot. And we had a behind the scenes leaderboard just for the employees who participated in ideation.
Wow, that's great. Obviously that's ideation gamification are, used for the users, but I rarely have heard of a community leader doing that internally. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And I think you're asking about internal, but also, and again, very few companies do this. It's hard to see the impact of your suggestions. And what I mean by that is at Intuit and Marketo, we did this. We built a scoreboard, and the scoreboard showed all the ideas, and you could, break it down. It was collapsible, expandable content. So you could say, under this category, so-and-so suggested the blue widget. But on the scoreboard, you'd say, we implemented a green widget because it was more in line with the company branding or something like that. The feedback loop with customers, and then the feedback loop with the product team, right? Like the gamification, the leaderboard shows their impact,
That's great insights. I think that few companies tap that that knowledge well, right? That well of knowledge. So I think that's great insight. And then looking ahead on future vision, you've seen every generation of community tools from early forums to modern automation stacks. Now we've got AI bots and stuff like that. But what's next? What do you see? What's the next new thing? We saw lithium kind of became Chorus, and then now they're kind of distributed into like a self-service model. We've got GameSite coming up strong. Other things. There's a lot of disparate sites out there that some developer communities think we'll just have our community on Reddit or Discourse, and they neglect to bring that conversation into the URL, the .com part. I think they lose a lot of octane doing that. So what do you see? How do you see this evolving? Obviously, we're like the planets in the early solar system. Now they're starting to come together and form moons and stuff like that. What's that new solar system going to look like for community?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had a really good crystal ball, but I think AI obviously is impacting and a lot of things here. So we'll talk about that in a minute. I think as a community leader, you do need to think about your solar system, your ecosystem, and you mentioned Reddit. So whether it's you're looking from an AI discovery perspective, right? Citation is really important. My 3 C's for AI discovery are content, community, and citation. So if ChatGPT is saying Reddit and Quora, whatever so I think you need to be active in those non-owned communities, but then bring people back to the mothership. Just again, like in the product, we had community content, but we gave users the option to like read what's in the product, community content, and then go back to the main hub, so to speak, the main community. So I think, there's the owned and non-owned approach. I think really building out that ecosystem. It's funny in companies that, advocacy sometimes is in a different group than community. We're getting better there. If you have people who are teaching courses or partners, how do you get them involved? And then I think from an AI perspective, there's kind of the strategic layer of how you handle segmentation and personalized content for that. There's the operational side. Everybody's now trying to do AI search, all these different, community platforms, but there's auto tagging, there's categorization, there's routing. Vanilla does a pretty good job of workflow automation. That's kind of another part of it. I then go to the engagement layer. So this is interesting, is that the first, today, a lot of your traffic's going to come from Google. Slowly, it's more and more, if you do it right, it's going to come from these LLMs. So really thinking through your LLM strategy from a community perspective. And what do I mean by that? It's funny, I mentioned earlier about LLMs and or AI, how no one's talking about including the customer. I think when a lot of people now are talking about AI content, but they forget knowledge-based content, and they forget community content. And so a feature I would add to all these platforms is, how when a customer posts a discussion, it's kind of an open field. But if you ever went to WikiHow, when you make a suggestion, they have a field for a title, which obviously the community does. But then they have they kind of you click on a button, and it basically will indicate or guide you through the structure of your post. And so I think what these community platforms should do is when somebody wants to post something, is it says summary here, bullet point 1, bullet point 2, bullet point, really guiding the user through the answer. And then the second thing is highlighting, talking about ecosystem. These LMs really like the expertise that somebody has. So there's a whole engagement layer that, and I talked about the content on the site, and then it's also what you do on the LM itself. And then I think the last, so strategic layer, operational layer, engagement, knowledge. So how summarization, I think community leaders, AI could do this, but maybe have the human do it, is summarizing topics. So, very few communities, how do I say this? Content's kind of all over the place. There's categorized, but they're not they're categorized by how we think versus how the customer thinks. And so I think there's an opportunity to kind of either curate or use AI to create these hubs of information. And then integrations is probably the next key thing. So how your community integrates with other platforms. We see this a little bit in terms of federated search, but I think a next step would be is if we want community to be a main focus, is really thinking through how community integrates with the product, how it integrates with your LMS, your university platform, how it integrates with other areas. And the last one, so, I'm a baseball fan. So, and I actually worked with the last two companies, is what I call there's a customer health score, kind of a digital health score, and community is a big part of it, is actually, take the scoring, the gamification you have in community, but also layer on top of that, the courses people take, right? How they participate in the product. So you're building a batting average or on base average for all the engagement. And I think that's a real opportunity for either a community company or another company that's in the life cycle space.
I think you're describing kind of the evolution of community operations and the age of AI. I think what you're saying is that the community leader, for example, you and your team are now data orchestrators. It's like a data orchestration. So you're not just doing the editorial calendar, that's at the core, but you're orchestrating because there's all kinds of different data streams and content and you want to get that into one kind of tribal knowledge base, which I'll take from the name for my podcast, and make sure that the content that is vetted or green-lighted is in a structure that that intuitively comes to the customers when they're searching it wherever they might be, Google or through chat.
Yeah, that's great. And I would just add to, and that's great. And what I would add to it is doing it either at a role level, persona level, or since I'm in the enterprise space, an account level as well as the customer level.
And what's the one piece of tribal knowledge that you'd pass on to the next wave of community builders trying to operationalize meaning and connection in this new realm of community?
Yeah, words of wisdom, I guess. I don't know. Since I haven't had my coffee yet. I think the key thing here is you need to I think to be successful today, you need to think beyond just being a community moderator or community builder, like develop another superpower. I've invested a lot in self-serve, and maybe that's a little broad, but I think, to get ahead, to get your community to have more visibility in the company and also to help your career is figure out, what's that other superpower that you bring to the table, or what else can community do? At Intuit, just going back there, it was really using user-created content to answer customer questions in a product, which is different. Some companies are trying to move, some community platforms or LMS platforms are trying to move in the community space, so they're trying to approach it that way. So that would be kind of like, and AI, to say your AI, is a superpower is too broad. We can have a whole discussion about that.
It's a tool, it's evolving.
Yeah.
Let's do a quick lightning round and wrap up.
Sure.
What's the first community tool that you fell in love with?
The first community tool, Prodigy. Which, so people probably won't remember, in the 80s, I worked with Prodigy and CompuServe.
Awesome. They can Google that.
Yeah.
I remember it because I was there.
You and I are older than 20, so we remember.
Yes. I'm 22. What's the most underrated skill in community ops today?
I don't know if it's the underrated skill, but I think to get under the hood, like really figure out like how things work, I think is really important. You're making a platform decision, spend time to learn how APIs work. I mean, it sounds crazy, but if we pulled 10 community managers aside, they'd say, we know what an API is, but we don't have it, right? So I think for an operations person, that's really key as well. And then also, I think take something like the editorial model and figure out how you build, this cross-functional infrastructure.
Inverted pyramid thing.
Yeah.
5 W's and H. What's the one mistake you think community teams keep repeating that you just see it, maybe peripherally or at events or anything?
They don't do the math. So what I mean by that is, they want to build a community, but if, look at how many customers you really have or how many potential prospects, and say, just start out by saying 5% of those we're going to engage in a community. Is that going to be 100? Is it going to be 1,000? Even those numbers are pretty low, and maybe you can just get away with Slack. So I'd start with do the math. I mean, it's easy if you're into it, but I have worked at companies where you might have 500 companies, customers, which might not be bad for mid-stage, early stage, and then say, okay, I'm going to have 5 people at those companies. Well, that's 250, 2,500 potential people. But what happens if only like 5 or 10% engage in the year one? It's pretty low.
Yeah, and I see this. I'll just add mine, just for the heck of it. I still see building versus buying, and I always said you want to buy, not build community platform. So I think a lot of companies, I think that's a mistake that they quickly learn.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And now finish this sentence, please. Community without operations is like
a day without sunshine.
That's great. And finally, what's the one lesson you wish your younger self at Intuit had known?
I think just, when I got there, I didn't realize how valuable it is to talk to the customer and read customer verbatim. Really understand what the customer is saying. I don't think enough of us do that. So that took me a while to learn, and the last story here, Scott Cook's story. You know, I was an MBA, thought I was hot shit, smart, dressed a little bit nicer then. I'd go into Scott Cook's office with a PowerPoint, Excel, and he'd rip it up and throw it in the trash. I'm like, oh my God, what are you doing? And he'd say, just tell me what the customer is saying. What are the words they're using? And then tell me how you're going to use that to develop empathy in your product.
And that's classic Scott Cook.
Yeah.
He was intimidating, but also it's such a genius when it comes to business. So anything else you'd like to add, like what you're doing now, or what's on the...
I'm at LastPass working on digital self-serve, coaching baseball, debating when I'm going to write that book or finish my book. But I just want to say, Tom, it's great seeing you. We haven't talked in a long time, so don't be a stranger. And I'm always here to help you or anybody else. You can find me on LinkedIn.
You're my Dai Sensei, as we say in Japan. And so where can folks, if they wanted to ask a question, they can obviously comment here on this platform, and I'll share it with you. But where can they reach you? Maybe on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn. I answer everything on LinkedIn, and I'll be honest with you. If you want to meet this week, I might say I can't meet this week, but I answer everything. And, every question somebody has is a learning opportunity for me.
Scott, thank you for paving the way and proving that community isn't just magic. It's a method. The TurboTax community didn't just launch a platform. It really launched a mindset. And those conversations, when nurtured with the right systems and care, they can scale trust. So, folks, if you enjoyed today's episode, please like us, follow us, subscribe, and talk to my fellow builders out there and Scott's fellow builders. As always, keep trending your own tribes, keep tending to them and building them, because that's what we build together. And that's how we build tribal knowledge, and we pass that on. So thanks, Scott. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you later.